The Federal Evidence Warehouse sits on a decommissioned military base 30 miles from the nearest city, one of several aging storage facilities housing evidence from closed criminal cases dating back to the 1970s. The warehouse contains materials from thousands of prosecutions, confiscated drugs, seized property, financial records, and weapons taken during investigations that concluded decades ago. Federal policy requires evidence retention for specified periods even after cases close, creating massive archives that few agencies have resources to manage properly. This particular warehouse holds evidence from over 15,000 closed cases spanning 4 decades. The facility operates with minimal oversight following budget cuts that eliminated dedicated archival staff. A single contractor provides basic security services, including perimeter patrols and alarm monitoring, but nobody actively manages the inventory or conducts regular audits of stored materials. The warehouse appears on federal property lists, but receives minimal attention from agencies whose priorities focus on active investigations rather than maintaining archives of closed cases. The neglect creates an institutional blind spot where materials sit forgotten in a facility that exists on paper but receives little actual supervision. The evidence archive includes over 12,000 firearms confiscated during investigations from the 1980s through early 2000s. These weapons came from drug trafficking operations, organized crime investigations, illegal weapons sales, and various other cases that prosecutors won and judges ordered evidence retained pending exhaustion of appeals. After appeal periods expired, the weapons should have been destroyed according to standard procedures, but budget constraints and staff shortages meant destruction programs were repeatedly delayed. The weapons remained in storage year after year, essentially forgotten as institutional memory faded and agencies focused on more pressing concerns. The security contractor assigned to the facility employs guards who conduct twice-daily perimeter patrols and respond to alarm activations. The contract is low bid and provides minimal compensation, resulting in high turnover and guards who view the position as temporary employment requiring little investment. Most guards never enter the warehouse itself, focusing patrols on external security while assuming internal inventory remains secure behind locked doors. The minimal oversight creates opportunities for theft if anyone recognizes the facility's vulnerability and the value of its forgotten contents. One guard working the facility for 6 years recognizes the opportunity that neglect creates. During his time at the warehouse, he observes that nobody from federal agencies visits the facility. No inventory audits occur, and the internal storage areas remain untouched year after year. He explores the warehouse during shifts, discovering the massive weapons inventory and realizing these forgotten firearms represent substantial potential profits if he can safely remove and sell them. The guard decides to systematically steal weapons, confident that the minimal oversight and absent federal management make detection extremely unlikely. The theft operation begins cautiously with the guard removing small quantities to test whether anyone notices. When the initial thefts go completely undetected, he grows bolder, eventually stealing dozens of weapons weekly and accumulating an inventory of hundreds in his home and storage units. The guard maintains careful operational security, varying his removal patterns, taking weapons from different areas of the warehouse to avoid creating obvious gaps, and keeping stolen inventory separated from his legitimate possessions. The systematic approach indicates planning and awareness of how to exploit the facility's vulnerabilities. The stolen weapons are old, but generally well preserved due to the climate-controlled storage conditions maintained automatically in the warehouse. Most are handguns and rifles from the 1980s and 1990s, vintage models still highly functional despite their age. The guard cleans and performs basic maintenance on stolen weapons, ensuring they're in good working condition before sale. Some weapons require minor repairs, which he performs using parts purchased through normal commercial channels. The refurbishment produces weapons as reliable as when they were first confiscated decades earlier. Distribution happens through contacts the guard develops in criminal networks that always seek weapons sources. He sells to intermediaries who understand they're purchasing stolen government property but don't question the specific source. The below-market wholesale prices and the weapon's complete lack of documentation make them attractive inventory for illegal markets. The intermediaries resell to dealers who distribute across multiple states, creating layers between the guard and end users who employ the weapons in crimes far from their origin. The pricing structure reflects both the illegal nature of transactions and the weapon's desirability as completely untraceable. The guard charges $300 to $500 per weapon, depending on model and condition. Prices substantially below legal retail, but high enough to generate enormous profits, given his theft costs nothing beyond the risk. Over 5 years, he steals over 4,000 weapons, generating illegal proceeds exceeding $1,500,000. The money allows lifestyle improvements that should raise questions given his security guard salary. But nobody familiar with his employment circumstances pays attention to his apparent financial success. Financial benefits include property purchases, vehicle acquisitions, and investments completely inconsistent with security guard compensation. The guard structures his spending to avoid dramatic, sudden changes that might trigger suspicion, gradually improving his lifestyle over years as illegal proceeds accumulate. He reports some income through a fictitious consulting business, paying taxes on false revenue to avoid IRS scrutiny while hiding the actual criminal source of funds. The financial structure creates appearance of modest business success while concealing systematic theft of federal property. Federal investigators first noticed the problem when weapons confiscated in 1980s cases begin appearing at crime scenes in multiple states. Forensic examiners tracing firearms used in current crimes discover serial numbers matching weapons that federal databases show as seized evidence from cases closed decades ago. The pattern initially seems like isolated failures in evidence destruction procedures, perhaps weapons that weren't actually destroyed despite paperwork claiming otherwise. But as more examples accumulate across different jurisdictions, investigators recognize a systematic problem suggesting coordinated diversion rather than scattered administrative errors. The investigation focuses on identifying where old evidence weapons might be stored and how they could enter circulation decades after confiscation. Agents review evidence retention policies and storage facilities, discovering a neglected warehouse on the decommissioned military base. The facility's minimal oversight and absent inventory management make it an obvious candidate for systematic theft if anyone recognized the opportunity. Investigators request access to review the facility and its security arrangements. The initial inspection reveals shocking conditions. Federal agents find the warehouse contains massive weapons inventory with no recent audits, no regular oversight, and security limited to contractor perimeter patrols. The evidence tracking system hasn't been updated in years, with no verification that stored items actually remain in the facility. Interior surveillance cameras are non-functional, and access logs show only security contractor personnel have entered the building in recent years. The conditions create perfect environment for theft by anyone with access and willingness to exploit the vulnerability. Investigators interview current and former security guards, learning about the long-serving guard, whose improved lifestyle and apparent wealth seem inconsistent with security employment. Financial analysis reveals property purchases, investments, and spending patterns that a security guard's salary couldn't support. Workers mention the guard occasionally worked overtime shifts alone in the facility, opportunities that would allow weapon removal without witnesses. The evidence builds a profile of someone with means, motive, and opportunity for systematic theft. Surveillance begins on the guard, to document current activities and identify potential buyers or intermediaries. Investigators observe him meeting regularly with individuals who have criminal records and known associations with illegal weapons trafficking. Some meetings involve exchange of packages and cash, behaviors consistent with ongoing illegal transactions. The surveillance suggests active rather than historical theft, indicating the guard continues exploiting the vulnerable facility despite years of successful operations. An undercover operation launches when investigators identify one of the guard's intermediaries through surveillance. An agent poses as a dealer seeking reliable weapons sources, making contact through criminal networks and eventually connecting with the intermediary. Over several weeks, the intermediary mentions his source who can provide vintage government surplus in quantity at attractive prices. The description matches what investigators suspect: stolen evidence weapons being sold as if they were legitimate surplus when they're actually systematically pilfered federal property. The meeting with the guard happens at a location away from the warehouse. The guard is cautious, questioning the agent about his business and needs before discussing available inventory. Eventually, he shows photographs of weapons he can supply, vintage models from decades past. The agent recognizes several as types commonly seized in 1980s and 1990s investigations. When questioned about source, the guard vaguely describes government liquidation without specific details. The conversation gets recorded, documenting the guard's willingness to sell substantial quantities of weapons he clearly obtained through questionable means. The first purchase provides definitive proof of theft. The agent receives 5 handguns that forensic analysis confirms match serial numbers of weapons confiscated in 1980s drug cases and supposedly stored as evidence. The weapons came with no documentation, sold as completely untraceable despite their clear government origins. The connection proves the guard is stealing from the evidence warehouse, providing the breakthrough investigators needed to build a comprehensive case. Additional purchases over 8 weeks allow documentation of the full scope of operations. The guard provides weapons from different years and case types, indicating he has access to extensive inventory and isn't limited to specific sections of the warehouse. He mentions having thousands available and describes access to archives that nobody checks anymore. Each statement builds evidence of systematic theft from the neglected federal facility. Federal prosecutors coordinate with agency leadership to plan a comprehensive operation. The guard's theft potentially compromised thousands of cases if evidence was removed from files that might face legal challenges. Prosecutors must review every case with evidence stored at the warehouse to determine whether missing weapons might affect legal proceedings. The scope proves massive, requiring teams to examine over 15,000 case files to identify which had weapon evidence that might now be missing. Arrest and search warrants cover the guard's residence, vehicles, storage units, and the warehouse itself to document the full extent of theft. Tactical teams plan simultaneous execution, preventing the guard from destroying evidence or warning any accomplices. The warehouse inventory requires specialized teams to document and verify against historical records, determining precisely how many weapons are missing and from which cases they originated. The operation launches on a Tuesday morning when the guard reports for his shift at the warehouse. Federal agents and local police meet him in the parking lot, executing the arrest before he can enter the facility. The guard initially denies wrongdoing, then invokes his right to counsel when agents confront him with evidence from undercover purchases. Agents seize his credentials and keys, preventing access to the warehouse where additional theft might otherwise occur. Simultaneous searches of the guard's residence and storage units reveal extensive stolen inventory. Agents find over 800 weapons in various locations, all vintage models matching types stored at the warehouse. Documentation includes photographs and serial number lists, apparently kept as inventory records, with notations suggesting which weapons had already been sold and which remained available. The personal records provide comprehensive documentation of systematic theft spanning 5 years. The warehouse inventory audit proves devastating. Federal teams spend 3 weeks cataloging weapons and comparing actual inventory against historical evidence records. They discover over 4,000 weapons are missing, far exceeding even the extensive theft investigators suspected. The missing weapons came from hundreds of different cases spanning 3 decades. Some cases had all weapons evidence removed, others only partially looted, suggesting the Guard selected weapons based on ease of removal and market demand, rather than systematically clearing specific areas. Evidence seized from the Guard's records includes communications with over 20 different buyers and intermediaries who purchased stolen weapons over the years. Federal agents work to identify all individuals in the distribution network, charging those who knowingly purchased stolen government property. Several intermediaries cooperate, providing detailed testimony about their transactions with the Guard and describing how they understood the weapons came from government sources, even though specific details were never explicitly discussed. Media coverage proves catastrophic for federal agency credibility. Headlines emphasize that thousands of confiscated weapons sat forgotten in a neglected warehouse for decades, then got systematically stolen by a security guard exploiting minimal oversight. The story generates public outrage about waste and mismanagement, allowing massive theft of weapons that ended up in criminal hands. Congressional oversight committees schedule immediate hearings demanding explanations for how such extensive theft could continue for years without detection. Congressional testimony reveals systemic failures at multiple levels. Budget cuts eliminated dedicated archival management positions, leaving facilities like the warehouse operating without proper oversight. Security contracts went to lowest bidders providing minimal services. No regular inventory audits occurred because agencies lacked resources and prioritized active investigations. The testimony leads to demands for comprehensive reforms in evidence storage and mandatory regular audits of all federal evidence facilities. Trial proceedings begin 9 months after arrest. The Guard faces numerous charges, including theft of government property, interstate trafficking in stolen weapons, money laundering, and conspiracy spanning 5 years. Prosecutors present overwhelming evidence, including the weapons recovered from his residence, documentation he maintained of his theft operation, recordings from undercover purchases, and testimony from cooperating intermediaries describing his systematic theft and sales. The defense attempts to argue that the weapons were abandoned property because they sat unattended for decades and nobody from federal agencies supervised the facility. This argument fails against clear evidence showing the weapons remained government property stored at an official facility, with the Guard's employment as security provider creating duty to protect rather than steal the inventory. The weak defense crumbles under the weight of evidence proving systematic theft rather than salvage of abandoned materials. Conviction comes after a 4-week trial. Jurors find the Guard guilty on all counts, determining he deliberately exploited his position to steal thousands of weapons from a vulnerable federal facility. The conviction provides accountability for 5 years of systematic theft that put weapons into criminal circulation. Victims of crimes committed with stolen weapons attend sentencing, describing how violence perpetrated decades-old evidence weapons devastated their families. Sentencing occurs 6 weeks after conviction. Federal guidelines call for substantial prison time given the quantity of weapons stolen, the breach of trust inherent in theft by security personnel, and the violent crimes enabled by the stolen weapons. Prosecutors argue for maximum sentences, emphasizing that the Guard exploited vulnerabilities in the evidence system and his own position of trust to profit from massive theft of government property. The judge sentences the Guard to 24 years in federal prison. The sentence includes 18 years for theft and trafficking charges, 4 years for money laundering, and 2 years for conspiracy, with terms running partially consecutively. The judge also orders forfeiture of all property purchased with illegal proceeds, restitution totaling $2 million covering the value of stolen weapons and investigation costs, and a permanent ban from security or law enforcement-related employment. The substantial sentence reflects the serious nature of exploiting his position to steal weapons used in subsequent crimes. Civil asset forfeiture proceedings seize properties, vehicles, and all assets traceable to illegal proceeds. The recovered value totals approximately $800,000, substantially less than total illegal proceeds, because much money was spent over 5 years. The seized funds are applied to restitution obligations and investigation costs, though the guard's limited legitimate assets mean full restitution will never be collected. The case prompts immediate comprehensive reforms in federal evidence storage procedures. New policies require regular independent audits of all evidence facilities, enhanced security measures including internal surveillance and access controls, and dedicated staff responsible for archive management. Agencies receive additional funding specifically for evidence facility oversight, eliminating the budget-driven neglect that allowed the warehouse theft. The goal is ensuring no federal evidence facility operates with the minimal oversight that made systematic theft possible. The neglected warehouse undergoes complete remediation. Federal teams catalog all remaining inventory, verify against case files, and begin systematic destruction of weapons and other evidence no longer needed for legal purposes. The facility receives upgraded security systems, comprehensive surveillance, and dedicated professional staff, replacing the minimal contractor services. The transformation creates a properly managed archive facility rather than the forgotten warehouse that enabled years of theft. Industry organizations representing security contractors develop enhanced training and oversight standards in response to the case. Professional security associations emphasize the importance of ethical conduct and the serious consequences of exploiting positions of trust to commit theft. Insurance requirements tighten for contractors providing security at sensitive facilities, with policies requiring specific background checks and monitoring procedures designed to prevent insider theft. 3 years after the operation's dismantling, federal agents continue tracing stolen weapons as they appear in investigations across the country. Some weapons stolen 5 years earlier are just now being recovered, having circulated through multiple owners before coming to law enforcement attention. Each recovery provides additional evidence of the theft's scope and sometimes leads to arrests of individuals who knowingly purchased or possessed stolen government weapons. For the evidence management profession, the case becomes required study material demonstrating the consequences of inadequate facility oversight. The Guard succeeded for 5 years because institutional neglect created opportunities that proper management would have prevented. Training emphasizes the importance of regular audits, proper security, and adequate staffing for evidence facilities, regardless of whether they house current or archived materials. 5 years after the case, federal evidence facilities operate under substantially enhanced oversight and security. Regular audits verify inventory accuracy, professional staff manage archives, and security measures prevent the insider theft that the negligence enabled. The reforms cost substantial resources, but represent necessary investment in protecting evidence integrity and preventing similar theft at other vulnerable facilities. The story concludes with recognition that institutional neglect of archived evidence created vulnerabilities that systematic theft exploited. The Warehouse Guard case demonstrated that forgotten materials remain valuable and susceptible to theft if oversight proves inadequate. But once patterns of vintage weapons appearing at crime scenes triggered investigation, comprehensive evidence gathering assembled proof leading to successful prosecution and systemic reforms preventing repetition. Vigilance through proper oversight of all evidence facilities remains essential regardless of whether materials are from active or closed cases. The Guard succeeded because agencies treated archived evidence as less important than active investigations. allowing neglect that created theft opportunities. Only sustained commitment to comprehensive management of all evidence facilities can prevent similar exploitation of institutional vulnerabilities. The work of protecting evidence integrity never ends, requiring adequate resources and attention even for materials that superficially seem less urgent than active investigations.